Coming up, some like it rough, and maybe Lindy does too. The Devils make a change at the head coaching position, but come on, it's too little too late. We dive in coming up next. Yes, sir. It is the Devil's Puck Luck podcast, where you know that we are your hosts over here, Adam Marbeck over there, Danny McDonough, and a somewhat breaking news podcast. We like to take a couple hours before we really get into the meat and potatoes of it, Danny, but Lindy Ruff out as the Devils head coach. Not surprising from a high level, but we are going to get in the weeds on the timing, what the Devils' intentions are for the rest of the season, and whether or not it feels like Fitz has been a bit slow to respond to what's happened over the course of this entire season for this team.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are surprised, like you said, on the big level of it, right? I think Ruff was going to be gone anyway at the end of the year in the off season. Some are going to say it's 10 games too late, 15, 20 games too late, maybe. And they could be right, you know? So I think a lot of this obviously falls on Fitz, but you and I have talked about it ad nauseum now. The head coach is going to be the one that gets fired. It's just, that's how sports are, right? It's what you do, you know, as a coach. You know, it's going to happen, right? If your team's not playing well and there's no heart and you're 8 points out of a playoff spot when you are a cup contender going into this year, you get fired.
And we'll see if we get to the point of getting back to that cup contender narrative that was coming into the season, because I think that that's a fascinating element to examine inside of this. But Ruff gets let go. You talk about here, when you go look at the schedule and you go and look at the results, going back to the Tampa loss, well, that's the first problem. The Anaheim loss doesn't help you at all. And then you get beat up, obviously, by the Kings as well. But in terms of letting him go, are you surprised that the Devils made this choice at this point? Because if the season, it's like one of two things for me. Either the season is too far gone, and so why maybe put someone like Green in a position of being lame duck-ish over the remainder of this season? Could kind of make it hard for him. Maybe helps get him feet wet, helps to try to inspire this team and show something different. Or is it this idea that while we fire the head coach, we misgauged where we were as a team? And if I'm Fitz and I'm the GM, I misjudged how much the players that we had in-house a year ago mattered and whether or not I'd be able to comfortably replace them a year later.
There's a lot to dissect right there. So starting from the top, the first question is, I really thought that after the Caps and Rangers loss, when they got dismantled by the Rangers too, I thought Ruff was going to go then. And I was surprised that he didn't. I thought that was the time to let him go before a West Coast trip. When he was on the West Coast trip, I knew that he was going to at least finish this out. I told you from the jump, and I was wrong. I thought Ruff was going to finish the season out because I thought it was a little too late now to let him go, and to start completely fresh, you know, going into the new year, into the off season. There's a lot of holes on this team, man, and Fitz gambled. You know, he gambled with the goaltending, no depth at goaltending, going in with Vitek and Akira. You know, he gambled with the young core at the blue line. You and I both know that. And there's a lot of blame to go around. But if you look and try to dissect this from who's behind the bench,
right?
I don't know about you, and I'm gonna pose this question to you, because what I saw is a team that was dejected. I saw a team that was holding their head down after a goal given up. I saw a team that looked frustrated after what looked like a seeing eye puck going into the goal past Dawes. You know, even when Vitek was in, when Akira was in, that you're not getting the goaltending. And they felt like they couldn't win. And I felt like their body language felt like they couldn't win. Did you see that the last 2 or 3 weeks, minus obviously the Sharks game, you know, minus, you know, a couple games after the All-Star break? But it seemed like this team lacked the urgency, the fire, and the fun. Like, this team just didn't look like they were out there thinking they can win games anymore.
Well, and that's why, again, it's funny because we're here. Lindy Ruff gets fired. That's the breaking news. Okay. And then we set that aside because that's a narrative that we discussed going back to last offseason, how the fan base felt, whether or not it was a successful season, who was responsible for that success, etc. But when you talk about the players, remember, Nico Hischier said what, 3 games ago? That's it. It's time. We're all in. You're going to see everything that we've got out there on the ice. We know exactly what we need to do. And then I didn't see it particularly. And the part of it that you and I have debated, you know, hey, motivation. Well, that's on the coach. Now, I said, hey, the players bear a personal responsibility to give maximum effort and to be fully engaged, even if you maybe disagree with what your coach fundamentally wants you to do in a given game, possession to possession, right? Period to period. It's still what you're supposed to execute. So if you don't buy in, you're guaranteed to not get great results. However, this goes above Lindy Ruff to the GM, where I wonder how much did the frustration for these players on the ice, how many games this year did they look and say, well, even if we came out with the best of intentions, the play between the pipes has not been good enough. We could make a strong case that 70% of the games this year for the Devils had subpar goaltending. Some games you won in spite of it, some games it evened out in the margins, and other games you lost. And I can understand that part of it wearing down on the players, even more than the coach and whether or not his voice was lost in the locker room. It's just, it. When you look out on the ice, whether it's in between the pipes, which is critical, or your teammates, if you see a player that clearly does not fit the mold or clearly is not pulling his weight or accomplishing what you need him to do, them to do in the case of goaltending, yeah, you're going to get dejected. Like you're going to go on the ice thinking it's not a matter of if we give up a goal that we think could have been saved, it's when. And are we able to get out ahead of this opposition and get ourselves a 1-goal lead, a 2-goal lead to safeguard against it? So then you press. So then you take more risks. So then you bail on your defensive assignments. And all of a sudden, maybe we actually end up spending a lot of post games talking about what isn't working or what players are struggling with, as opposed to this global theme. The goaltending's been terrible basically all year, and the players in front of them are always going to be looking over their shoulder and waiting for when that mistake is going to come.
Yeah, I think Eric Hall said it really well in his postgame in the atrocious loss to the Kings. It's between the ears, and I think he's right. I think a lot of this is a mental thing for all the young kids, especially. And listen, I don't want to minimize it. These kids are thrown into a very difficult role. Luke Hughes and Nemitz, especially. They're thrown into a role where they haven't played a complete season at this level, and it's a lot to take on. But I think they lost faith in the system, and I think they were so focused on getting the system right that Lindy Ruff, wanted to really, he wanted to push it continually, but he wanted to tweak it to help his players. I don't think Lindy Ruff by any means was a bad coach. Do I disagree with a lot of his decisions? Yeah. Do I think it was time to let him go? Absolutely. You and I have talked about that at length.
Mm-hmm.
It's beyond that now, right? It's beyond that because you look back in December, Adam, and this team needed a goalie. This team needed a goalie. This team needed help on defense after the injuries. Everything with the McLeod situation. Fitz dragged his feet, and Ruff probably should have been let go before that. And it's gonna, again, we talk about it, it's going to fall on him. And like you said, this breaking news now is Lindy Ruff fired, and everybody is so happy because the fans have been screaming for it and calling for it, whether it's deserved or not. It happened, and it was going to happen anyway. Is it good that it's Green as the interim coach and not a bigger name in here? Absolutely, because like you said, we talked about it before we started this episode. Now's the time for the young kids. Play the young kids. See what this team is made of. Keep those strides going towards just being better players, being better individually, but as a team, and get that fire back. And that's what this team really needs.
I want to touch on what you mentioned there about the players and being over focused on trying to execute what Lindy Ruff wanted them to do on the ice. And then I'm going to be honest with you, we're pulling back to a high level here, and we're going to talk about the GM because I think that's more of the story here coming out of this firing of Lindy Ruff than even Lindy Ruff and his firing, which we may have assumed was coming at some point, if not this season, in the offseason. Before we do that, though, tell you about our friends over at DraftKings. Oh my goodness. We know that hockey games move fast, and sometimes hockey coaching careers move fast too. But with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, you can score faster than anything happening on the ice. This week, new customers can bet just $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. We know that there's going to be games out there and the Devils are going to be involved, but I would not put pressure on yourself to look at them as being an odds-on favorite in a lot of these matchups. Nevertheless, when you download DraftKings Sportsbook app with promo code
THPN,
he got there. New customers bet just $5 on the NHL and get $200 instantly in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook with promo code
THPN.
The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-3669. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hills Casino and Resort. 21 age, varies by jurisdiction. Void in our friends to the North, Ontario, Canada. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.com/hockey for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gambling resources. NHL and the NHL Shield are registered trademarks of the National Hockey League. Copyright NHL 2024. All rights, why they are reserved. Now, I've reserved myself to this point of the show. I know that I'm in the minority about dissecting the Lindy Ruff era for the New Jersey Devils. You and I debated this via text, and I feel somewhat bullish about my opinion on this now. A lot of things happened this season. Dougie Hamilton injury, Jack Hughes injury, right? There are things that happen, and then the immensely poor goaltending. But the goaltending part of it is something that Fitz had control of going all the way back to the offseason. I am of the belief that the New Jersey Devils organizationally, in spite of being contenders for the cup coming into this season, I think internally they were cautious about overcommitting to the window being open starting now based on a somewhat surprising, very surprising run a year ago, beating the Rangers in the playoffs. So I think that if you could take your mind back and say the Devils make a surprising run to the playoffs, but lose in the first round. They go down 0-2 to the Rangers, and they end up losing 4-1. If that had been the outcome a year ago, I think we would examine the choices that Fitz made now differently. But because there's this energy behind, hey, we're in win now mode. We need the goaltender now. We need to commit now. I think that might be a little bit of a false narrative that would be short-sighted about the 4, 5 year, 6 year window that the Devils are just on the precipice of entering into.
Yeah, maybe. There's a lot to think about if that series went differently with the Rangers. Akira Schmid, we thought was going to be the guy. You and I were debating if he was going to be the number one goalie going into game one.
Intellectual honesty here too, as you said about you thought Ruff would be fired in the offseason. He wasn't. You and I sat here in the offseason and said, we think that they're going to go with Vitek and Akira, which they did. And you and I both said, and we're comfortable with that. Now, you had the caveat of saying, and then you can make a choice as the season progresses, and that decision never came. But that's the one thing, we're not going to sit here and say we knew all along the goaltending wasn't going to be good enough. We were comfortable entering the season that way. The returns, being as hollow as they were, had to either inspire something different or start this thread that I feel myself pulling on about how they viewed this team from a high level and from a multiple season agenda.
Yeah, it was a big gamble. I think we know it was a big gamble. We wanted to be confident from what we saw, and it goes back to what you just said. If it's 4-1, we lose that series, maybe Fitz makes a move for a goalie. We don't know. There's so many what ifs that could happen, and it all comes down to, did we just have the Rangers number? They fired Gallant right after that series, a 7-game series. They fired their head coach, so
expectations at an all-time high, right?
Exactly. And you see what the Rangers are doing now and having an off end of the year into the playoffs, and they grew from it. They got a new coach, and look what they've done. They got Laviolette, who is a phenomenal coach. They have depth. Right now, they're looking at the trade deadline to make a move to push them even over the top. And they're in the top 4, in my opinion, to win the cup this year. They're one of the 4 favorites to win the cup. And to think about what we could do now, just a season away, you go back to the 2008 Penguins when they missed the playoffs and then they won a Stanley Cup. Things like that. Just because we missed the playoffs this year doesn't set us back tremendously that we need to rebuild our organization. And I think that is the big thing that fans need to just take a deep breath, because we're a goalie and a defender away from being legit again going into this next season. And now's the time. If during the trade deadline, here's my big thing, Adam, and jump in on your opinion on the trade deadline. You cannot force a move if you're Fitz. Fitz waited way too long. He should have got a goalie way sooner than he did. However, if you cannot extend Toffoli before the trade deadline on Friday, March 8th, if you cannot get a contract in place or at least agree to a contract and agree to numbers and just move around some numbers and figure it out weeks after, you trade him and you go after a player like Ullmark from Boston. They have a situation, Ullmark and Swayman. Go get him, package him with a pick and go get Ullmark, because he's going to be your goalie going into next year. I'm fine with Markstrom too. If you can package a deal that does not sacrifice our future in the next 5 years, go get Markstrom. I understand that he's 34 years old, but you have 2 years of term right there where he's going to be your number one goalie going in with a new coach and a new system next year. So I don't want Fitz to force a trade. I'm not going to be unhappy if he doesn't make a big trade now and waits to the offseason and gives these young kids a chance to really develop for these next 20 games and for them to gut it out and to really show what they're made of. But something needs to happen, obviously, with Fitz. I think you and I agree that he dragged his feet, and there's a lot of decisions that were big question marks to us. And now we're paying for it a little bit. And Ruff paid for it with his job, but obviously he made some in-game decisions that were not great. But the system was broken. Listen, let's call it what it is. The system was broken, wasn't working. Ruff didn't adjust well enough on the fly to keep his job, and now we move forward.
Yeah, and I'll go back to what you mentioned there about Fitz dragging his feet. This is again where I look at it as like perceptually, right? He dragged his feet if they believed that this was the year when they should have been going all in. And I also wonder too, and we'll reflect on this as the season winds down and get to the off season. How much did the injuries impact the way that Fitz approached this year? On the one side, you go, well, here's some injuries, so you need to go out and fortify your team. The other side of that coin is, wow, this might be too much for us to overcome. And unless we're, like you say, willing to start sacrificing future assets all the way down the line, it's going to take a lot of work. I think I might, and we'll talk about this as we move forward in the deadline, disagree on going and getting Markstrom. Now, price point matters on that, but I don't, it's again, because I don't know if you get Markstrom, then you have to paint the picture as you started to there, right? What's the other one or two moves that you make that next year you say, okay, we're right back. We're in that contender fringe conversation, and we believe that we're in a position to go be highly competitive again. That's a delicate dance. Otherwise, you have a 34, 35, and 36-year-old goaltender. He's an improvement, no doubt about it. But what does it mean to the total agenda? Toffoli becomes fascinating to me. I think if you can get value, you should definitely take a look at that. And the last thing I think we can close out on here is, do you think that this inspires anything in terms of, you fired Lindy Ruff? Do you ultimately, as we said at the top, Lindy Ruff relieved of his duties as the head coach, Green named the interim head coach. Does this change, in your opinion, the way they approach the deadline? As in, I don't believe that letting go of Ruff is so much about saving this season as it's about turning the clock over here and understanding where the agenda is carrying forward. Maybe they will get a spark and they will win some games here. There's still something to chase, but I don't think this is about saving the season, and therefore it's not about another move coming here at the deadline to try to really amplify what they do down the stretch.
Well, no, I think for Green, this is to see if he's going to stay on the staff if the team responds to him. I still think the Devils need a coach. I'm hoping it's going to be Sullivan if Pittsburgh lets him go at the end of the year. I've talked to you about that for a while. Berube's another guy. I don't think it really changes Fitz when it comes to what he wanted to do at the deadline. I think no matter if Ruff was the coach right now or he was fired as he is now, I think his mindset has to be the same. You can't sacrifice, the future for getting someone that you're not sure if you're going to sign. No rentals. I think we both know there's zero chance that there's going to be rentals. And that probably puts Hannafin off the board, from Calgary, unless you can extend him. Because I don't think that you want to risk getting Hannafin right now and not being able to sign him and giving up assets for him, right? And it's, it looks like Hannafin's going to go to Florida or to Tampa anyway.
Because now you're talking about contenders trying to really cement themselves. If you're chasing the wild card, or if you want to be cemented as the number one seed, all those things come into play here now in terms of who's willing to spend a little bit extra. The Devils, you find it hard to believe that they're willing to go that extra mile when it comes to trade negotiations to get a player in.
I think that Toffoli's going to have to take a team-friendly deal. I don't think Fitz is going to go above $6 million. And you look at the Palat contract and you compare players to Toffoli. I think his agent's going in asking for 5.5 or 6 over 4 years. And I think for the Devils, you can't really go over 5. I think you want to extend him, give him 4 years at $5 million. I'd be comfortable with it. When it comes to if he's not going to sign and we get nothing and he walks away in the offseason, it's a colossal fail from Fitz. So I'm on record saying that if we do not extend him and we don't get assets for him at the trade deadline and we miss the playoffs and he walks and he signs with another team, all the fans are going to be pissed off. And you're going to be pissed off. I'm going to be pissed off because it's a waste. Yeah. I like Toffoli because, number one, he's the goal leader, right, on the team. He has that veteran presence where I feel like he's going to be good on Jack's wing. I do. I think he's going to be good for Jack and stability for Jack as that veteran presence. I just don't want to go into next year with what ifs. I want Fitz to take a stand here because I don't want to feel like he's not sure what he's going to do, right? Yeah, it seems like there's a lot going on where it's like, yeah, we need a goalie. But if Markstrom's available, right, if we can get Markstrom, let me ask you a question. I'm going to propose a trade. You say yes or no to this. To get Markstrom, Holtz, a second round pick, and a low round prospect. Are you taking Markstrom? You getting Markstrom?
It's definitely a conversation because I believe in Holtz. I really like Holtz. But if it's not a first round pick and it's a prospect that we don't know if he's ever really going to get there, it's definitely a discussion. I'll just for sake of argument, I'll say no. I wouldn't make that trade because I want to believe that Holtz can actually be a more important piece to this offense than maybe some other guys we're going to discuss.
Yeah, and that's the difficult question. I don't even know the answer to that. That's something that we would sit here and talk about. We would dissect it, right? We would dissect it. And that's the thing that makes the trade deadline fun. Because you got to remember, Adam, right? When you talk about goaltenders that you can go and get in the offseason, you can try and go get Saros from Nashville, but Trotz is going to be a hell of a guy to try to mess with to get that trade to be favorable for you. And you're going to have to pay him $9 million a year when his contract's up, maybe close to $10 million. A guy like Dylan, a guy like Brady Shea, defenders who are going to be free agents. Hannafin's going to be a free agent. There's a lot of question marks going into the offseason now. And I agree with you. You can't pull the trigger at the trade deadline with a player that could be a question mark for the future of this team and give assets up that you still believe in, maybe with a new coach. Maybe a new coach comes in here and puts Holtz at third line and does not take him off at third line.
So that's where we can close out here because so on the Toffoli note, I like the idea of maybe the shrewdest thing you can do is say, hey, Toffoli, go play hockey somewhere else for the rest of the season. And then we'll see you again in the offseason for the contract. We'll bring you right back. But if you know where that's landing, then I think it's okay to take, quote, a little bit of diminished value on the trade market for him if you understand where it's going. You can play that close to the vest. You can really be bullish and you'll fight guys on it. But in the end of the day, if you think you can get some draft capital, you go do it. That's the other piece that you mentioned there, though. The difficult thing here is, okay, well, Green's there, interim. Can he maybe hold on to the job? How much does he have similarities to Lindy Ruff coaching underneath him on the staff? How much is he going to change? You have this difficult thing now of saying, well, what are we dramatically going to see different? And even if we see good things from some players on the roster right now, who is the head coach that we think we're going to bring in long term? And is he going to do things differently? And are all these pieces going to fit together, right? So that's, I think, the unfortunate nature of no matter what happens, when you fire a coach, you automatically set up the next guy and the players and the organization ends up in a bit of murky waters. And I think that's unfortunate. Obviously, that's why I think you preferred fire Lindy Ruff in the offseason. Why? So all of your decisions are informed by the next head coach you bring in. This is a good sample size, and maybe you see some players get back to their normal career numbers and averages. Maybe Timo is a guy that we really keep an eye on here to see if he gets himself back into San Jose form because he's looked in glimpses good, but overall kind of muddled. So there's a lot of those kind of narratives that you keep an eye on. But that's what I think makes this a really, really brutal time to be transitioning out of a head coach, heading into the trade deadline with such big narratives that normally we'd be thinking about Toffoli in such a different way. We'd be saying, okay, the negotiations, it was difficult. That's all right, though. In the offseason, we'll sort this out. Now it becomes a bigger question mark. And last thing, very quickly before we close out, is there any goaltender out there on the market potentially, a lower level guy, someone that's not going to cost a lot to bring in that you think would be worth pursuing to see if a baseline better performing goaltender all of a sudden gives you more game-to-game results that you think the team in front of them are deserving of?
I mean, the Sharks goalie Kakkonen, we talked about it. He had a terrible game against the Devils, but he's someone that you look at that would not be the high profile guy, right? I think that he would be better than Vitek. I think you and I can both agree on that. But yeah, it's not a move I make because what are you giving back to the Sharks? They're going to want prospects. They're not going to want as much draft capital, I don't think. I think they're going to want solid prospects. They're going to want like someone like Casey. And then it goes back to, are we willing to give up that piece to get what we aren't sure will be our goalie of the future? And that's where I kind of look. I look, and I feel like you feel the same. That's when you look for the first thing, a veteran goaltender in the trade market that will be a staple with this team. And of course, you and I are going to be breaking down the money and the cap situation, obviously, as the deadline goes on and especially in the offseason. But, to close out with you here, I'm looking forward to Fitz speaking tomorrow at 10 a.m. I think that's going to be very telling. I think that he has a lot of answers to give the fans, that he's been quiet for so long. I want to hear why he made the decision now. I want to hear, we're going to hear everything that we hear from GMs, right? Listen, we have a specific culture. We're a winning hockey club and organization. We pride ourselves in that. So it was time.
By the way, I cover a Nets organization that went through this entire process about, 3 weeks ago. So guess what? It's going to be super to hear from the GM. It's going to be a lot of GM speak that's not going to satisfy you if you're looking for real answers here.
And he's going to say the same thing about Kevin Ollie as he's going to say about for the Nets as he's going to say about Green. You know what I mean? It's going to be the same there, and that's fine. And I understand that as an interim head coach.
Yep.
And this is an opportunity for Green. Listen, a lot of people have been crapping, so to speak, on what Green can do and that he's a problem with this team too, and the whole coaching staff needs to go. So now Green probably has that fire in his gut like, hey, you know what? I'm going to prove not just to myself, but to the organization that I'm here to stay, that I'm here
and any other team that's looking for a head coach this offseason, right? Yeah. You guys aren't going to go with me. That's fine. I'm showcasing now, right? I'm showcasing for other opportunities potentially, if not here, right?
And he's not, I don't think by any means he's going to be the head coach of this team next year, unless he rattles off 20 wins in a row to end the season. The Devils win a playoff series. I think it's going to be a veteran coach that has the ability to be tough. You know what I mean? To be tough with the guys. And I think that the passive nature of Lindy Ruff really is what made him lose the locker room. I feel like
you don't know what's going on with him physically. Maybe his heart couldn't take getting dialed up in the locker room. You got to think about these things, guys. Listen, I know we need to wrap this one up because we're coming up against the clock with some other obligations. Before the deadline, though, we are going to come back in, and I'm going to pitch Tyler Toffoli trades that end up getting the Devils back, maybe a solid goaltender to put between the pipes for the remainder of this year, maybe get some draft capital. We're going to try to massage this thing, get a couple of teams involved, and see if there's a way that we can come to terms on the Devils giving themselves a chance to learn more about their team over the back end of this season, rather than stand pat and rather than probably have the deadline pass with nothing occurring and us staring around kind of wondering, what is this going to be? Because that's a long rest of the year if we feel like we just have nothing but a laundry list of questions. We'll also, as Danny mentioned, cover the Fitz press conference tomorrow morning. So we'll break down what he said, if anything of note, specifically why the move now, why move on from Lindy Ruff at this point of the season. We'll get into all of that, of course, and you can get into all of that with us. Over on YouTube at Devils Puck Luck, over on Twitter at NJ Devils PL. I got there in the end. At Danny the Face, at Adam the Arm Bracket. It's all good, dude. It's been a long day. At Adam, I'm coming off the combine coverage it doesn't matter. I've got a lot happening. You also get us on the social medias at Devils Puck Luck. I'm not going through the list of them. I'm only going to mess them up. Dan's going to get us out here with a quick quip.
Can you imagine if we beat the Panthers tomorrow? Can you imagine?
By the way, yes. The only thing that would be more perfect than this is having the Devils come out and beat the Panthers. And all I want is just cameras turned right back on the entire fan base and just organically react to what you think this means. Because we won't know. We'll have no clue what it means. Probably nothing. And then they'll lose the very next game by 7 goals and it'll all be a disaster. But that's where we're at here. Your gut should be in absolute jumping jack mode right now, doing somersaults, because every single game is going to inform whatever narrative you think this team is currently heading down the path of. That wasn't a quip. It wasn't very quick, but we will catch you next time on Devils Puck Luck.